I was sitting there, I was thinking, Steve has been exceptionally nice the last couple of weeks, and I finally realized, because he knew I was speaking here today, and if I have the floor, I might, right? So, no, I'm really grateful. I was sitting here thinking, we have 3 of our key board members that are here in this church, Chris and Steve, and Pete, I think, is down with the children, I believe, and I got a chance to see Dara and their beautiful new baby. But on behalf of the Shepherd's House, I do want to thank you for being a key church. I mean, you really are a rock. You're a pillar to the Shepherd's House. And I was here a couple of years ago, and just sharing with you. You've been a pillar to me personally, and I know you know some of the plight of my own family and some of the health issues with my wife. And I just can't extend to you enough thanks for what you have been and continue to be to Shepherd's House, to my family. I'm blessed to have people on staff. I have 2 folks currently that are with us today, and they're going to share in just a little bit. So I have Jillian Devine with her husband Corey. Jillian is our women's director, and then I have Dave Notari, just a wonderful man we were blessed to find, and he is our director of development and came on with us in September, right, 1st of September. And just, again, I'm looking forward to them being able to share with you. So I want to talk to you briefly, at least with my time, about Grace Changes Everything. And I think there was going to be a video, and so you guys want to do that? Great, and then I'll start.
Without you, there'd be no place of hope for men with nowhere left to turn. No safe haven for women to escape abuse or addiction. And no refuge for their children. Without you, there'd be no community working to break the cycle of hopelessness. Without you, there'd be no grace. And grace changes everything. Shepherd's House Ministries of Central Oregon help transform a life.
Well, I wanted to lead off with that. It's actually our new commercial that is running on a number of different stations. We were blessed to have a really creative person try to capture the essence of who we are and what we're trying to accomplish here in Central Oregon. And as you notice up here, our tagline is Grace Changes Everything. And I want to talk to you briefly about what I believe to be the greatest good news and the most challenging good news of the New Testament, and it's grace. I like to talk about it, and Steve kind of touched on it himself as he struggles with that. I think the reason why I love to talk about it and why I'm completely sold out to it, and I believe that creating healing environments where God's grace flows freely is the game changer in our life, is because it's so hard for me. It does not come natural. In fact, I'd almost have to say this, that in many respects we love to receive grace, but boy, is it tough to give it sometimes, right? Especially in situations in which things aren't turning out quite the way we thought they were going to. But we're faced with this dilemma and this challenge that we find always coming up in the New Covenant. Grace, grace, grace. And in the first chapter of John spoke of 2 specific words to try to describe specifically who Jesus is. And in the first chapter, verse 14, he says, "The Word became flesh and lived for a while among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and the only Son, who came from the Father full of grace and truth." And if that's not enough for him to say that, he's going to say it again in a couple more verses. He says, "John testifies concerning him. He cries out saying, 'This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' From the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." Twice he drives home this point that in Jesus embodies these 2 major attributes, grace and truth. Grace and truth. So just for a few minutes, try to imagine if you could, for a moment, what would the Old Testament look like if grace didn't exist? And I just thought of a couple of things. Where would David be? Where would Joseph, Samson. Some of these were actually later on in the New Testament noted as pillars of faith, right? But they've also had major character defects and flaws and failures. Solomon. Well, how about the New Testament? Quickly, I started thinking about Peter, right? Peter he's going to become the rock in which the church is going to be built upon, and then we find Peter at the very tail end of Jesus' life prior to his crucifixion, and Peter's denying him, right? But then there's this beautiful scene of Jesus showing up on the beach later, restoring Peter to his rightful place. What about Paul, if there wasn't grace? A bounty hunter that went throughout all of the Middle East looking for people, Christians specifically, making sure that they couldn't speak of the grace of Jesus. I was thinking about the different stories that Jesus told. What would happen if grace didn't exist? Where would the story of the woman at the well be? In fact, that encounter alone, we could spend a long time talking about, but that one moment of encounter for this woman not only changed her life, but she became really the first missionary that went back to her village, and it changed her village. Grace changes everything. The lost son. Or maybe the one parable that really is sometimes hard for me to wrap my head around is the workers in the vineyard. If you remember that story, it's in Matthew 20, and people get hired throughout the day. The people that agree to a certain sum of wage at the beginning of the day, and then later they need more workers, so they hire again in the middle of the day. They need more workers, they hire again, and they finally need a few more workers, and at the very end of the day, they hire people for about an hour. And then after work was over, they all lined up to get paid, right? The people that worked the less amount of the time were in the front of the line. Those of us that might have worked all day, we were in the back of the line. And guess what began to ripple down behind throughout the line? The people that worked only an hour were going to get paid the same amount as the people that had worked all day. Wow. Radical grace. Radical generosity. I mean, it changes everything. It turns things upside down. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. It permeates everything that God has to say to us from Old Covenant to New Covenant. It is impactful in terms of not only your life, my life. Here's a question, and I was thinking about this. What would our lives look like without grace? I wouldn't be married. How many of us might not be married if it wasn't for grace because we had a spouse that's gracious? I don't know if I'd have very many friends. Seriously. My mouth gets me in trouble. I wonder, what would our lives look like if grace didn't change everything? I mean, it's changed so much in my life, and it keeps working its way in me and through me. I want to tell you about a little story. When I was off to college, I came back for spring break. And a group of my friends and I, we decided to go down to the neighboring town to have a party. And we were in this house, and of course we were young, and we were drinking, and we took off later in the night, and I was driving, and I had a car full of kids. And it was in March, and it had been having a snowstorm, and I crossed over the center line. And about that same time, some lights came on, and it wasn't friendly lights. They were police lights. In fact, they actually were really friendly lights because I had no business driving. But anyways, he pulls me over, and he gets me out, and he says, "Have you been drinking?" I said, "Of course not." And, I grew up in a small town in Midwest. My dad was a principal, which is about as bad as having a dad that's a pastor, because everybody knows who you are. And so to this day, I'm pretty certain I know who the officer was, but I'm not quite sure. But anyways, long story short, he says, "Hey, Kurt," he says, "I'll tell you what, if you admit that you've been drinking, I won't arrest you guys, and, everything will be okay." And I said, "Wow." And so I got my friend out of the car, and I said, "Would you tell that deal to my friend too?" And so he gets out, and he says, "Yep." He goes, "If you guys just admit you've been drinking," he goes, "I'll tell you what," he goes, "everything will be fine. I won't arrest you. I won't charge you or anything." It's like, okay. So we said, "Yeah, we have." He goes, "Okay, so we're all going to go down to the police station. You're going to call your parents and come get you." I was like, whoa. Didn't think about that one, right? And my dad had always said to me, he goes, son, don't call me at midnight, because if you do, from jail, I'm not coming to get you. And it was midnight, and I remembered those words. So anyways, long story, I had to call mom and dad, right? They came. One by one, kids had left, and I was the next to the last kid to leave. My best buddy, Steve, was still there. So my mom and dad show up, and we go walking down these big, huge marble stairs out into the parking lot. And dad's over here on my right, and mom's on my left, and I'm with my mom. There's two cars in the parking lot. Dad goes to that car, mom goes to this car, I go with my mom to the car. Right? We have a 5-mile drive back home, and so we get home, we get into the driveway, we pull in, and we're getting out. And what am I preparing myself for? The worst, right? Because I knew I deserved it. I was waiting. I knew exactly what was going to happen. At least I thought I did. So we walk into the house. It's probably 12:30, 1 o'clock now. We go into the kitchen, and mom and dad go upstairs to their bedroom, and there I am standing in the kitchen all by myself. I don't know what to do. It's like, well, they're going to bed. So I decided to go to bed. Wake up the next morning, and I could hear mom and dad moving around the house. It's a Sunday morning, and I was laying in bed, and I was thinking, today would probably be a really good day to go to church. So I go to church with them, right? That was not so easy, because most of the kids that were in the car with me were also in our church. We'd also been in youth group together, and there was a lot of parents there that day that weren't very happy. So that was a hard day at church. Came back, I was prepared for what was going to happen, right? Lunchtime, this is when the hammer's going to drop. And so we come back, mom fixes lunch, and the problem was my spring break was over, and I was going to have to head back to college. And we go down, we eat lunch, and they don't talk about it at all. It's killing me. Time is coming where I've got to leave. I've got to go back to my school. And so I walk out into the driveway. I've got my 2 bags. I'm a mess. I'm absolutely a mess inside. I'm on the verge of crying for the last many, many hours. I could see in my father's eyes that I was hurting him. I could see it. And I get out onto the driveway, and I turn around, and I finally broke. And I dropped my bags, and I looked at Dad, and I looked at my mom, and I'm crying. And I said, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And my dad did something incredibly powerful. He came, and he wrapped his arms around me, and he hugged me, and he says, I love you, son. I wish I could tell you from that moment on that everything worked out and Kurt changed completely his course of life. But I can tell you for certain that moment on that driveway where grace began to change everything in my life, it shifted my life degrees. And I started putting together the pieces of God's grace for a guy like me. And my dad was instrumental in being able to show the way to that. Grace changes everything. I say it's caught, it's not taught. And what I mean by that is it's not that we can't teach it, but there is something about grace that you got to catch. And in most cases, you catch it when you're broken, when you're at the end of yourself, when you don't know where else to turn. You are absolutely broken. And I think there's something about that moment in our life when we start to catch it. And when we get to catch it, we get a chance to give it. It begins to flow through us. And I would say this about the Shepherd's House. I am proud to be a part of the Shepherd's House. Number one, because it has helped save me. It has helped rescue me and my family during some really hard times. And so I love the Shepherd's House personally because it has made a difference in my life. But I love the Shepherd's House because I think we work really, really hard to love people no matter what. No matter what. I'm called to love, not judge. And I think the Shepherd's House is called to love, not judge people. Our doors are open, and the people that walk through them, my hope and my prayer at every turn, what they experience, is a radical kind of love and an amazing kind of grace that begins to change everything in their life. And it begins to change everything in our lives too. One last story. Grace changes everything. A few years ago, a guy named Tyler came to our mission. Tyler was a middle-aged man. He was a plumber. He had been doing quite well, but he had a problem. He was an alcoholic, and to the point in which it had taken everything from him, his family, his children, and he found himself living in a tent for quite some time. His alcoholism was consuming him. In fact, so bad that what brought him to us, he was in such a health crisis because of his liver disease, that when he was brought to us, he was near death. Tyler stayed with us, entered into our long-term program, and he was with us for a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years. And during that process of time, it became abundantly clear that Tyler was not going to get better, but Tyler was going to die. Tyler had no place to go. He had some kids in the area, but those relationships were really in trouble. His mom, which was probably the best relationship that he had, lived down in Santa Rosa. As Tyler began to move in a very terrible direction with his health, simultaneously, his heart and his ears were opening up. And ultimately, he came to know and accept Jesus Christ. And then as things began to progress, and it was evident that he was going to pass soon, a couple of our guys in our program put Tyler in a car. They drove him to Santa Rosa. They brought him home to his mom. In the last few weeks of Tyler's life, he got a chance to be with his mom and pass away in her arms. Grace changes everything. And for Tyler, it changed it for eternity. So I'd like Jillian, if you could come up.
I told you not to make me cry. Well, good morning. And, that's nice. You guys interact. This is a joy for me. And if I or my husband look a little bit familiar, it's because when we moved down to Bend, Foundry has been our church for the first few months that we were down here. And as my husband's work schedule had to change, we've had to go and look at a couple other churches. But the reality is, coming here and worshiping with you today was a joy and a pleasure for me. And you all made this a much easier transition than it could have been. So I just want to say thank you for that, and it was a joy to have communion. So grace changes everything. I believe this for my life. I believe this for the lives of the women and the children that we work with every day. I've been doing this work up in Washington and in Idaho, and then moved down here to be a part of the Shepherd's House. And so I've been doing ministry for about 14 years. And one of the things that I love about ministry work is that, we love the story of the prodigal son, don't we? It's a beautiful story and the best depiction for me of seeing God's grace. And the picture that I always think of when I think of this story is I think of a son who comes back and he's dirty and sad and broken. And he has this idea of how his dad is going to treat him and maybe how his other family is going to treat him. There's not a lot of details, but I just figure that for myself because I've been in a couple of those situations before where I have this expectation about how people choose to treat me, and then he's met with this beautiful surprise. Before he ever even gets home, his father runs to him. And he hugs him, and he tells him how much that he loves him. He reestablishes his identity as his son. He puts a robe on him, puts a ring on him, and it's just this beautiful picture of grace. And in that moment, if that son was not changed, I don't know what else would have changed him. And we love this as a society, and I just think of some of the things that tell us that. There was this baseball team or something like that recently won after. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Who was that? The Cubs? Okay, so the Cubs just won after, and this was like the biggest deal that we've seen in a really long time, right? And I was sitting there at my own birthday party, and my boss sits there and starts playing a song about the Cubs and how they won, and I was like, happy birthday to me, right? But we love these stories. We love these stories. And so at the mission, we have a ton of these stories, and it's actually one of the best kind of work. I worked for a secular agency for a while, and we didn't get to see some of these things because we didn't have the changing power of the gospel, right? And so at the mission, we get to see this all the time, and actually I have a couple gals right now, and I'll really quick, a gal that we're just getting to know, but she's really embraced being a part of our program. She's been involved with drugs and alcohol and everything that goes along with it for about 35 years now. And she's broken and she's sad, and she comes to us, and I've seen this actually again and again and again, that when people choose to do program and choose to become a part of a community and a faith-based family, you would think that some of the best things in the world would happen to them. But I'll tell you again and again and again, those first 3 months are some of the most difficult. And not only are they trying to figure out life without drugs and alcohol and things that they've used before, but they're trying to figure all of us out too. And so one of the gals came to us and she said, hey, I don't know if you're going to believe me or not, because I've already lied to you several times already. And we're like, yeah. And she said, but my dad's dying. I just found out, and he's in hospice. And so we spent some time with her, just talking with her and crying with her. And the drug and alcohol counselor within me, I'm like, we need a plan. We need to make sure that you're going to be safe and sober during this time, which are all good things. But you know what we did with her? We just wept. We cried with her because she has spent the past 35 years not being able to be in relationship with her family because of things that she has chosen. And what's so amazing, she went away for about 2 weeks and spent that time with her dad, and she came back to us and stayed sober. And she said, you know what? I would have never been able to get through this if you guys weren't calling me 3 times a day, if you weren't coming to me. We had an awesome volunteer that kept bringing them food every single day, her and her family. We actually got to share the gospel message with her family without even opening the Bible. We got to share the love of Jesus Christ by sharing a meal and sharing a hug and sharing some of the joy that we can still have in the midst of some of the worst things that we ever experience. I think that one of the things that I look at when I look at the story of the prodigal son is that I look at the older brother. And I think for me, kind of like what Kurt was talking about, the older brother rings a little true for me because I haven't experienced some of those things. I've had my prodigal stories, but I haven't experienced a lot of those things. And I've, well-educated, always have had a job, worked really hard. And so sometimes when I read through that scripture, I look at the older brother and I go, yeah, that makes sense. He hasn't done anything wrong. Where's his party? I've been there. Has anyone else? You're all nodding. No? Okay. I'm just going to say yeah. But what I love that the Father does is the Father shows grace to not only his younger son, but to his older son as well. And just a couple of highlights. So the father comes out to his older son. He comes out to him in the field after he's denied coming inside. And you know why he did this? My thought? He wants to take away the idea that his son is rejected because he's choosing to embrace his younger son again. He entreats his older son. He woos him. He tries to explain why he loves his younger son so much and why it's so important to celebrate him. He calls his older son, son. I believe he does that, and I've read this somewhere else. I believe that he does that because he wants to establish that his son has an identity. He also said, "You are always with me, and that all that is mine is yours." And so he deals with any sort of insecurity that the son has. I love that grace is for everyone. Looking at the time, okay. I think that some of the things that I've learned from having some of these older brother growing up, I'm an older brother tendency kind of person, but some of the things that have been very easy for me to do is to judge other people in their prodigal behavior, right? And so some of the things that I've learned just from working with people in ministry settings is that the judgment is pretty easy, but once I take a few seconds and actually learn a little bit about their story, it's very, very difficult for me to judge. So I think about, this father and his two sons, and if I was working with them in a family counseling session, I think that I would have some really significant questions before I could ever judge their behavior. One of the questions that I was thinking about is, tell me about your pain. Has your father always been this gracious? Where's your mom? What kind of losses have you had in your life? I think that when we start to understand a little bit more and maybe have had some of the similar experiences walking in somebody else's shoes for a little while, it really makes it difficult for us to judge. And what I've actually learned is that our brains cannot change if we're living in constant judgment. Lately, I've been working with a gal who really struggles. She really struggles with some of the older brother issues, and so she came to us and was working through some of her prodigal things, and she got through those, and she's like, "Okay, I'm ready." I'm like, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She's like, "Well, I think I want to stick around a little bit." Really? Okay, so tell me about that. I'm really interested in this whole relationship thing. I don't quite get it. And we saw some of that when she was complaining about some of the other things, we don't do our jobs right, the ladies don't do their chores right, the house isn't ever clean enough, some of these issues that come up. And as we've talked about some of those things, because that's a natural part of it, as we've talked about some of those things and where she's coming from when she's saying that, she and I explored that a little bit, and she said, and I wanted to read this to you, as we explored her fear, she found out that she had this belief that if she doesn't do everything right, or choose all the right people, or control her life around her, then God will not bless her. She also found that in her family of origin, she was never the favorite, no matter how hard she tried. And the best that she could do was actually to bring down her siblings and tell on them to her parents so that maybe they could share in some of the negativity that she experienced every single day. We really grieved this together. This is a protective behavior so that she didn't have to feel rejected and unloved. And the thing that we kept saying over and over again is that no matter what I do, God will never love me more or less than he does right now. That statement still blows me away. That statement still blows her away, although she says it 45 times a day. She's sharing that message with other people. That's what grace does. So thank you so much for having us here today. I'm going to have Dave come on up.
Wow, 3 speakers. You guys are awesome. Good morning. How are you? Like Jillian and Kurt said, my name is Dave, and I recently joined the Shepherd's House Ministries just under 3 months ago, so I'm really new to the ministry and to this area. And it's been truly an amazing experience to join a staff as loving as this staff and to be part of the team and to work with the folks that we get to work with on a day in and day out basis. I love a good story. There were some good stories this morning, definitely some tearjerkers. One story that comes to mind for me as I was thinking about sharing this morning is a story you might be familiar with. It's a story of a man named Michael Orr. And he is a football player. He's an NFL football player. And you probably maybe have heard that name because a movie was made about his life, a movie called The Blind Side. Anyone familiar with that? Heard that one? Couple hands up there. Well, for those who aren't familiar with that story, it's about a boy named Michael, and he lived in just deplorable circumstances. His dad was in and out of jail. He was orphaned. His mom was on drugs a lot. He lived in a foster home and was homeless for part of his life until this family came along, Leanne and Sean Toohey, and they just adopted Michael into their lives. They loved on him in a way he had never known before. They accepted him into their lives, and they began to just make him part of their family. And Michael learned to play football, or actually he kind of knew how to play football, and he progressed a lot. And through his time with the Tooheys, he ended up going on and playing college football and then professional football. And his success story is really pretty neat. He was in the Super Bowl last year, even though the Panthers didn't win. But he's just a really unique story. Well, one of the things that came out during that movie that really spoke to me was a conversation that Leanne had with a friend over a lunch. And the friend said to her, "Wow, that you're really changing that boy's life." And Leanne's comment back to her was, "No, actually, he's changing my life." And as I think of the Shepherd's House ministry and the experience I've had there, it's really been a lot of the same. As I've seen guys and gals come in from just really difficult life circumstances, and they come into this warm, grace-filled, welcoming environment, and you just begin to see through the process of them sharing and living out their faith on a day in and day out basis, for them to just change and transform literally in front of our eyes is a really amazing experience. One of the things we do is a time called self-evaluation, where it's kind of a time for folks to work through some of their challenges and talk through some of the life circumstances that they're facing. And so during that time, you're just privileged to listen in onto the stories of what these folks have gone through. And whether it's Freddie sharing his story, or Frankie, or whether it's Matt or Larry, some of the guys who I've had a chance to get to know a little bit, as I'm sitting there listening to them unpack their lives and seeing, the amazing things that God's doing in them, and as I've participated in that, what it really comes down to is, God is working and changing their lives in a profound way. And maybe what I do is helping in a small way, but really what's happening is, in addition to that, God is transforming and changing my life through that process too, through that grace-filled expression of His love, through what I see Him doing in their lives and the acceptance and love that I feel from them. And that was a really unexpected outcome that I wasn't thinking was going to happen. But that's what's occurred, and that's what the ministry is about, and that's what it's like to be part of that grace changes everything environment. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kurt and let him just wrap things up here, but thanks again for your time.
Before we completely close, I wanted to, we have a short video that we wanted to show, and is that ready to roll? I think you'll recognize this guy that's in this video, and then Jillian and I will close.
Yeah, I'm Sid Bristol. I'm a retired pastor, pastored 23 years here in Bend at Foundry Church, and come here as a volunteer and serve. I come here because I want to be here. What I see here is grace. You can have a place to sleep here tonight, even if you don't belong here. If you mess up, you get another chance. We don't just boot you out the door. We're here to love you and help you learn to trust people. These men, because I see them living in the circumstances. I see them bearing with one another, forgiving one another. I come away always filled. I never come away from here drained. I come away saying, man, I am glad I went. I want to come back next week. So they minister to me in ways that they never know. These men are just regular men, regular guys, and they're special. And I think right now the business community realizes these are good guys. These are just normal guys who just need to be loved, and they can love us back.
You want to go ahead?
Just really quick, wanted to share with you guys some practical ways that we can receive some love and give some love to these women and children over the holiday season. And the men and the women have a list that we're happy to share, just helping out with gifts to give them for Christmas. And the women and the kiddos, we love craft time. We actually spend a lot of time sitting around putting little things together. But they wanted to put together some little Christmas bulbs. And one of the things that we had thought of was to get some of our needs maybe for Christmas and put them on these Christmas bulbs. And then, so these Christmas bulbs, you'll see right back there, there's a little lit up Christmas tree. I think we have 20 to 25 here, and then we have more at the Women and Children's House as well. But if there's any way, like this one says jeans, and there's things on there, craft things, gift certificates, whatever you want to do, but just little ways of being able to share with the women and the children and the men that we care about them and want to love them and show them what gift giving is actually really like for Christmas.
Yeah, so on December 23rd is also our traditional Christmas party that we have for those in our programs. And so on the 23rd, that whole day is really just a celebration of Christmas. And we'll begin that with our chapel time and communion time, and then we'll transition to do a fun activity. We'll come back for lunch at noon. I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to join us at noon for lunch, it'd be great to feel free to join in. And after that, then we're going to do some gifts for our folks. And like I said, we have 30 men in our program, and we're looking for things like socks and coats and underwear and T-shirts and all the various sizes from medium all the way up into double extra large type stuff. And if you feel compelled to do that, feel free to bring them in. Georgianne Watson is coordinating that for me, so feel free to be able to do that. Or if you have more questions, my card is back there. There's information back at the table by the Christmas tree as well. And lastly, I'd just like to say this. Please pray for us, because 50% of our funding comes in from October through the end of the year. And so that's a big time for us as we pray and we're asking God to bless us. And so one of the things many of you that are on our mailing list will receive, we've had a wonderful donation come in of $200,000, and we're working to match that before the end of the year. And so if you want more information on that, please feel free to call me or talk to me, and my information's back there. But thank you so much for being such a loving church to us. And we're blessed to have Foundry Church in our lives. And I just thank you for all the things that you do, and many of you that volunteer here. So thank you. God bless you.